Hello, welcome to your video on critical pedagogy. So we're going to start with the basics of critical theory and move into how this impacts schooling. And so that leads us to critical theory in education and how we develop this idea of critical pedagogy. It's a very large concept that includes a lot of different theories and ideas. So this is to get you thinking. This is a common used quote in education. Everybody's a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid. And that's, a lot of people attribute that to Albert Einstein. I believe he's the person that said it. And the idea here is that we're questioning education as a whole. And is it set up to actually serve everyone correctly? And many people would say it is not. It's actually meant to just skim off a few really talented folks off the top, and everybody else is kind of sifted out and pushed aside. And so that's where we're exploring in these ideas here, and that's kind of where we get to this idea of critical and what it means to be critical. Now, there are some definitions here, and I want you to go ahead and pause it and read through them. Okay, so our first definition here talked about something that is crucial, judged, analyzed. The next one talked about making judgments. And if we think about that as our purpose, when we say critical theory, we are being critical, we're analyzing, we're judging something, and we're trying to identify flaws, not in a super negative way or in a depressing way, but in a way to correct problems, right? So the whole attitude of using critical theory in education will kind of help you think about this idea right here, right? Is, can we criticize our education system in a way to make it better? There's a definition of critical theory here as well. If you need to pause it, go ahead and pause it again and read that. All right, so critical theory is essentially a form of sociological theories that stemmed out of conflict theory. And critical theory was actually originally a response to fascism. And much of it grew out of Germany after World War II in a response to Nazism. And it consisted of many different thinkers and philosophers at the time who contributed to these ideas. And it's become a very large theory that has many different parts. But you can imagine how this could lead us into thinking about critical theory in education. Okay, so here's some theorists. If you want to go a little deeper with critical theory, you can look up some of these folks. Basically, a big part of critical theory relies upon how power exists and how power tries to maintain itself. And one aspect of this is through economic means, as you can see. Critical theory also impacts many other topics in our modern sociological perspectives. So these are some of the common topics that get talked about in sociology and other fields because of critical theory. So a lot of these topics you might hear common on in all your classes or in the news even. In a lot of current events, we might pull from critical theory to talk about these other things. And so now we get to education. So if we started with conflict theory, which is one theory within sociology, and I'm not going to get deep into that because I'm not a sociology expert, but you can go look that up. Conflict theory just basically has to do with analyzing the ways inequalities contribute to differences and perpetuate power. And then we have what birthed out of that is critical theory, which we've been talking about. So critical theory, then if you have a basic understanding of that now, we can look at how would that impact how we view schooling. And so we can come up with this broad field of critical pedagogy. And you all know what pedagogy is, right? It's basically our whole set of ideals, values, and strategies we use to approach education. And so if we're going to approach education from a critical stance, we have other theories that kind of evolve from that. One of the major ones that impacts education is critical race theory. Another big one that seems to rely upon critical theory is social capital. And so from those, we get very specific kinds of teaching sort of theories, but they are all rooted in critical theory. So we have culturally sustaining pedagogy, culturally responsive teaching, anti-racist education, the problem posing versus the banking model, which you read with Freire, funds of knowledge. All these are specific teaching theories, but they are rooted in sociological theories that are all stemmed from critical theory. Big web that keeps going. So with critical theory, we can start talking about things like power, oppression, intersectionality, social capital. So these are things that definitely reach their way into education. And once they get there and we start questioning how our systems of education impact students and how they interact with that system, we also can question who has the power and how do we look at that power and criticize the use of that power and how that impacts students' lives. And so one major area you should be thinking about as an educator is culturally sustaining pedagogy, which again is a pretty broad concept, but it is rooted in critical theory. And so here are some things that are related to culturally sustaining pedagogy, things like funds of knowledge, culturally relevant teaching materials, culturally responsive strategies, bilingualism, biliteracy, and decolonization. These are all concepts that contribute to a culturally sustaining pedagogy. And those questions are there to help you think about your teaching, okay? These are some resources on critical theory and sociology. If you're interested, I highly suggest them to give you a good background. None of these are in depth. They should not be the ultimate source if you are writing a paper on critical theory, but it could get you started. All right, good luck. Thanks for joining me. Have a good day.